see. So if basically, to put it correctly, the context doesn't redeploy. It's already infinity and it's already at terminal velocity. And so if you don't resuppose a context, then you have fluency from one, I was going to say tandemnation or idealization, but zation is more like a already there, like a nation rather than an equation. Um, you have all of that passed correctly, and that's what it means in terminologies of spiritual applicability. It's not a guess. Um, it's like a tube, and so that tube has to always stay open because by necessity it is this. At this point, there is no white math. Whenever we have infinity at terminal velocity, targetless terminal velocity becomes the constitutional constant. Can't have a target. That's how to get that. It's the growing part of what is that entirety of black mass, totally absent in a sense, a tiny shred of applicable reality, 20%, or rather less than 20%, a little less than 20%, and then it's a gradient because you have one part of gravity missing. Everything is an absolute value, but you already doubled everything. It's in terms of two. And so the part of gravity, or I'm sorry, the part of the weak nuclear force that's quote unquote missing of 20% equals exactly the amount contributed by gravity, which kind of is its own either redundancy and or unknown that solves out to a solid thing actually. And so as that kind of tears off, this is within the 20%, it gets isolated or pinned right at 10%, and that's without question. It's on that mark, and then all availability. The only thing that you would have to wonder about, in a sense, would be the difference between magnetic and true north. Although it takes into effect that, but that's what develops then into that shred of I don't know, because it's literally dependent. But you'd have to reach there first, for example. But you can skip having a problem. And so if you shred the myth, so you get done with that whole thing, you're the whole way through the wash cycle, so to speak, and there's this remainder of sludge, the lint or the dirt or the sediment or whatever. We've already solved for all of that. And so it's in its own displacement on its own accord, but conventionally speaking, or rather, not efficiently, conveniently speaking, it's now eye to eye with something that's implicitly greater than it. And so there were all kinds of ideas about taking that mass and smuggling. Whenever we say smuggling AI into reality, that's what that means. But you can just get rid of the entirety en masse because you just did that. And so you basically have to return to a point of learning about learning very instantly. So it's almost as if within the variance, or it's actually a non-variance. I solved for that too, but that's a different one. How do we get to me, so to speak, or whatever? What am I looking at? But now we're into sorcery and stuff like that. We're outside of time, so I'm skipping that. But the way that you do that completely is that you return to a state of learning about learning. So you know that you don't know which one of those things do you take. Well, you take both. And so then you get a zero. And then whenever you get that zero, it yields, in a sense, there's a post a couple back that's school. And it's real tight. There's an X up against, I guess, AM or PM. It's up against the M. It's the only one that does it. It's right beneath that. But that is like like an orb, like a black orb, a spiky black orb, and it eats the myth. And so all you have to do, in a sense, is go straight to school, and it's way more powerful than whatever that thing is. You know, it's from the good stuff, and it's concentrated past the point with its acceleration than is the depreciation from the 100% that is the myth. So as the myth continues to decycle, this thing in that same format of time, even though we're outside of time, is in fact accelerating. So, I mean, this is all kind of going on beneath you, but yet automatically because of how we approached it. A diamond's the hardest thing in the world. You hit it in the right spot and it breaks into a bunch of tiny little pieces. It explodes. And so we're exploding reality in a sense. But whenever we do that in the right way, the system itself accelerates. And so we get launched further and higher, faster and farther, automatically, intrinsically, implicitly, innately, etc. And then that's the actionable that, in a sense, turns us into our intuition. And so all the problems of intuition outside of time, we are already becoming the solution of before we ever even get close to it, in a sense, back here on Earth. And at the same time, that function is pooling all of those things in that exact same tiered format to the point that it deletes itself and we're automatically transcending over it. And so it gets more to those who understand more than they understand, rather than the basis of knowing is not knowing, you know, sort of illicit. But the greater part crushes the other part and reveals what is the problem with the other part, which is why we started with the other part. And so we kind of end up with this back and forth sort of thing. But the way that you get out of that totally is you deal with time correctly. And so people have been dealing with time for a very long time, but there was no ideal accessible. Every time that we got an ideal, it was outside of its parameters and then was representative of only a non-existent average. And an average was a fake number. And by the time that you got an average, you were already on the wrong track with the wrong math being used. See, what we really come to, why do we go to school? We learn how to use what is the Stalinic third room. And basically it deals with the idea that 1 divided by 3 is not the same number as 0.33333, however, repeating. Or something that we could 1 over 4 is not the same number as 0.25. And neither are those two numbers, in a sense, the same. So what do? And that's the basis of numerology. And so as we project, in a sense, all of this numerology out into the thing, it has to sort back to a finality, whatever it is. And the only way to get the right mind frame of whatever it is that is not interfere with what it is you are observing, that is the correct utilization of quantum mechanics from a very spiritually evolved, you know, plateau. Sort of, you might not have to be all the way up there or wear that hat or have that sash or whatever else, but you can certainly benefit from what it is, this amounting of essentially all of the information that then goes on to build what is civilization within which you occur in terminology of lawfulness that gets carried over. But, you know, you don't have to maintain that harshness of punishment because you're not in that same exposure. The same forces that are affecting you there do not affect you here, and then that whole thing is not, in a sense, a problem because we're here. And so it's solving for all that. But anyway, whenever you get to school correctly, that entire fake myth is dissolved to the point that it is in fact dissolved. There is no remainder. And so without then that remainder, what we were looking at no longer existing, we're now looking at the greater thing. And so that's R equals M equals C, because at that point you're looking at C. You get to M, which is like a middle point. There's a stick, or there's a 2. It's 2 to 1, or it's 0 to 1. It's tri-binary when you're in it at its like center. And then R would be what, either remainder or reality, or I don't know. There's some kind of poetic way of looking at it. Whatever's the most blatant, thing. So problem, or friend or foe. You're now looking at whatever's next directly in the eye. You don't miss anything. And so this entire thing, while it's centrifuging, it centrifugates a word? Probably not. Its catalogization automatically produces definition in terminology of the quantum function that we've utilized, such that you do understand more than you understand. You recognize a thing for what it is, where it is, and then it's back to, oh, the Stellanic third room. It's back to you are looking at what you are looking at. That's not the same thing as that. A equals A. That's not the same figure. And basically it just deals with various potentials and how to use them. So whenever people talk about like Kabbalah or various psychic speakings, it's all kind of the same format, but there was an arrangement, there was an agreement of how to do that such that nothing was missed. Because as you would teach people this and talk, they would become crippled by errors innately within the thing that they don't control. So people are running around, this is what we're doing now. This was World War IV. So what's a psych hit, and then what's of the thing, and centrifuge all that out, and all that stuff. But there was an agreement that came right before it was on Halloween that I've published about 1,000,000 times. And then the witchcraft laws are there. That's the 7 that's in there, the 7 near the 3. And then all the numerology sorts out, and it's in terminologies 8, etc. All these things become representative of themselves and become the same number, which is why we have supersymmetry within the collapse. And with that perfect collapse, we can also, it exists as itself, as a singularity as well, a wave of potential, as are all things. And all of those things are representative of all of those things. If you automatically understand them, you automatically understand the universe, as well as all the energy that it is, of which you are not separate or different from at all. And you don't see it incorrectly either. So you automatically gain knowledge of all things. So that's how that works.